te atua rongarawa, kia mau te ronga ki runga ki te whenua, kia pai te whakaro ki ngā tangata katoa. Onore ki te ariki nui te kingi ko te tuhiatia, ki te kahui ariki katoa, ma te atua rātou e manaaki e te aki e nā Waikato. Ka te waka tainui tēnā koutou. Ki te iwi o Ngāti Mane o Poto, tēnā koutou. Ki te piopatanga o Aotearoa, ki te amarangi, ki te manawa o te wheki, tēnā koutou. E te pihopa o te manawa o te wheki, pihopa rahu, tēnā koe. E te manu tapu e tūrā, ko Taranaki, tēnā koe. Ki te waka toko maru, te waka Aotea, te waka kurahaupo, tēnā koutou. Ngā mihi nui ki te piopatanga o Aotearoa, ki te amarangi, ki te upoko o te ika. Canon Pine, tēnā koe. Te ati pihopa rāwari, tēnā koe. E te whānau te karaiti, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's appropriate that we begin by remembering before God those faithful servants of this diocese who have gone into the nearer presence of God since we last met as a synod. And so I ask you to stand with me, and as I read these names, there may be other names of those who have served this house that are not recorded. If you can please give me those names, and they will be in the official record of this synod. Would you stand, please? The Venerable Tiki Tutarangi Raumati, the Reverend Peter Mitchell, the Venerable Reg Nicholson, the Reverend Jean Signal, the Reverend Alan Parkin, the Reverend Canon Ian Graham, the Reverend Margaret Parsons, the Reverend Betty Reischer, the Reverend David Harrison, the Reverend Barry Hogan, Canon Jenny Ellis, Mr. Robert Fisher, Mrs. Joan Burnett, Mrs. Laureen Williams, and Mr. Gordon Cooper.
The Reverend Margaret Greenway.
May they rest in peace. E noho. Can I firstly begin by adding my words of welcome to each one of you, to the welcome that we have received already, to acknowledge particularly our special guests. Thank you in what I know are incredibly busy diaries that you've given time to be with us, representing the city, the Parliament of our nation, our ecumenical partners and our schools. I want to also just take a moment to acknowledge in our midst Archdeacon Wendy Scott, who is the Dean-elect for St Peter's Cathedral. And Wendy, if you wouldn't mind just standing so that we can welcome you, and thank you for coming today. Just to explain a little bit about the way this is going to run, this address is really a focus on expressing my gratitude for so many who over the 20 years of my ministry as a bishop in this diocese have supported me, and some are here supporting me already in word and supporting me by their presence. And I'll come to some of those individually in a moment. Tomorrow we will take time right at the beginning of the session to reflect on where we've come as a diocese through an extremely difficult period. A period where we have had to face into some very hard realities, and where we have not only faced those realities but confident in the resurrection, we have addressed them, and we are in a significantly better place than we have been for a number of years. Thanks be to God. Thanks also, though, to some of those who have worked so hard. And I want to acknowledge particularly the Standing Committee and the Finance and Audit Subcommittee. I want to acknowledge our trustees. I want particularly to acknowledge Gerald Bailey and Robin Brocky, who have, like the chairs of our trust boards, put in hour after hour after hour. I want to acknowledge our diocesan manager and Jill, and Kristen, who is moving now to be full-time my PA for diocesan matters, and to Helen, who has joined us in the last week, and she joins us in time to help with the preparation of Synod. There are three people, well, really three and a couple of really important add-ons who I want to acknowledge specially. Chris Harding, our Chancellor. Chris, you said to me once many years ago that one of the responsibilities you had as Chancellor was to keep the bishops out of jail. Well, I'm not sure about Archbishop David, because we're not quite sure what those 4.5 years out of the country really were. But you've certainly managed to keep me out of jail. But both Archbishop David and I would be the first to acknowledge that your advice, your wisdom and your friendship has been unfaltering and unparalleled. And I am deeply grateful. And I know I speak for the whole of this house. You bring dignity and grace, humanity and wisdom, and we are profoundly grateful. I want to acknowledge Belinda and our children, because this is not a journey you could possibly have anticipated. This is not a life you could possibly have anticipated. But I want to say to you, as far away as you are, but listening now, that I love you and I am profoundly grateful. The major cost, if there has been a cost in the midst of so much joy, has been yours. I want also to acknowledge Archbishop David Moxon. I want to acknowledge someone who I have no doubt history will show has been and continues to be one of the great leaders of our church. I'm deeply appreciative of your friendship. I'm deeply appreciative of the way in which you have shaped and formed this bishop. I've told this story a couple of times, and it seems appropriate to tell it again. I was reflecting on this when I was visiting the parish of Morrinsville just 10 days ago. And I remember a meeting in St Matthew's, Morrinsville. We were talking, Archbishop David, about dual episcopacy going forward. And we were going around a series of meetings around the diocese, talking about whether this was something that the diocese could embrace. And right at the end, it was a packed church, people from all around the Piako Archdeaconry, and a woman stood up at the back of the church and she said, "We are so lucky in this diocese because, you know, we have a wonderful pastoral bishop. And we have Bishop Philip." And you know, there's a truth in that, David. To me and my family, you have been friend and pastor and colleague. And I want to say to Bishop Rahu and to our partners in Manawa Tawheki, thank you for welcoming Archbishop David back fully and properly and giving him a place to stand when he returned from Rome. And to David, to Tureti, to Kiri, to Aro, to Turea, and to Awatia. My apologies for not honouring you and welcoming you as I should. The diocese has, as I said, faced a period of unprecedented challenge. We found ourselves with significant internal debt and a level of lack of clarity around how that debt was in place and where the costs would fall. That required now nearly 4 years of really hard work. And part of that reality, and we'll go into this reality in a little bit more detail tomorrow, is that the Episcopal Endowment had been unable to fund the bishops of the diocese for a number of years. And that reality is the reality that we have to face into. We will this year, for the first time, break even in the episcopal expenditure against the income of the endowment, with, all going well, the way it's tracking, perhaps even a small surplus. But that is with one bishop, and that is with a significant grant from St John's College Trust Board, representing and reflecting on the role that a bishop has as a teacher and as an educator in the diocese. So we have, as we will talk about tomorrow, rebalanced the diocese, and we are moving forward creatively and energetically, and that is in no small part due to the strength and the creativity and the energy of so many of you. And the strength and the creativity and the energy particularly of the senior staff team who, as I said last year, have stepped up into leadership across the diocese in a way that has been supportive and creative. But the reality is that we had a dream. It's a dream that was given voice and birth over 20 years ago. That Taranaki, with those southern parishes amalgamated from the Diocese of Wellington into the Diocese of Waikato, would have for the first time its own bishop. And you called, all of you, in terms of the Synod, called a relatively young man from Dunedin. And we dreamed a big dream, and we have lived a great hope, and there has been much fruit and much to be grateful for. But that is not possible going forward. For those who are feeling a sense of loss because the availability of the bishop is significantly reduced from what you have known, to my brothers and sisters in Taranaki, and to those who I am getting to know so much better, and those communities that I am growing in my love for, in Waikato and Piako, Maunatauturi and Waitomo, where your experience and expectation of episcopacy as it has been cannot be met in the same way. As someone who represents who we are at our core and who represents the leadership of this diocese through all of this, I want to say sorry. I want to say sorry that our hopes and our dreams have to be redirected, repositioned, refocused. I want to apologise for any sense of loss and abandonment that you feel. But I want to invite you onto a journey where we don't know its particular shape or where it will end, but we do know that God is with us, before us, behind us, and that this is the God of the risen Christ. He calls us to step into those footsteps faithfully behind Jesus, the pioneer of our salvation. We have so much, and it's represented here around us, in the people and in our shared memory and history. So much to be grateful for. We are a community that is called to be marked by gratitude, marked by the grace of God, a grateful, humble, penitent people who respond to the love of God with confidence and with hope and with vision. We are called to be a community growing disciples, each one of us growing into that way of Jesus, each one of us modelling for others that way, each one of us inviting others into that relationship with the one who has given light to our path, who has challenged our thinking and our acting. And we are called to be transforming communities in who we are when we gather and in the way in which we enable the transformation of the communities in which we're set into places of peace and justice and righteousness. Jesus said that we are to love one another as he loved us. In other words, the unique way that Jesus had incarnated that love was to become the pattern of how his disciples are to love one another and to love all people. It's a radically inclusive love. There's no one who can possibly be excluded from that love. Now, St. Augustine gives us two clues to such a question of how are we truly to love. He once observed that Jesus loved each one he had ever met as if there were none other in the world to love. But Jesus loved each one he had ever met as if there were none other in all the world to love. In other words, Jesus radically individualised the affection he acted out towards others. Instead of never seeing the trees for the forest, Jesus reversed that process and never failed to focus on the particular and the unique in each human being. This represents an extraordinary commitment and discipline, especially because even in Jesus' day, he came in contact with many, many people and therefore must have found it tempting to lump people together in categories into classes and to allow the forest mentality to blind him to the genuine uniqueness of each human being. However, I don't think I'm being totally naive to say that even though such an ideal is a tremendous, tremendous reach, it is within the possibility of every one of us. We need to grow in our capacity to individualise our loving. Now, to be sure, only the Holy One can actualise this ideal completely. I've always love the little story about the boy who's trying to learn the Lord's Prayer. And one night as he knelt by his bed, these words came out. Our Father who art in heaven, how do you know my name? We must never forget that we're made in the image of that extraordinary love. And doing what Jesus did in loving each one he ever met, as if there were none other in all the world, is at least an ideal towards which we can strive, even if it always remains utterly beyond our complete grasp. Now, the second clue that St. Augustine offers is that Jesus loved all as he loved each. The way he loved was not only individualised, but it was also incredibly universal. I don't know which of these qualities is more amazing, but once again, Augustine's description remains true to the memories that we're given of Jesus in all four of the Gospels. Those eyes out of which he looked when he lived upon this earth were never filled with contempt or disdain. Even when the words Jesus spoke assumed a note of harshness, it was because of a concern that he felt for those whom he addressed. They were never words of hatred. And we must never forget that the opposite of love is not anger or hostility, but the opposite of love is indifference. But there is not one example in all of the Gospels of Jesus ever turning away from another as if what happened to that one made no difference to him. There was no indifference in Jesus. Jesus loved each one he ever met as if there were none other in all the world to love, and he loved all as he loved each. Now, the only response to such a love is gratitude. May this way always characterise our life as a diocese, always characterise our life as a church. So my family in God, followers of Christ, marked by gratitude, growing disciples, transforming communities. Let's be the people of God in this beautiful diocese we call home.